Yo, what's going on, guys? It is Fox90 here. Welcome back to a brand new video and another F1 debate for you guys today here on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Canadian Grand Prix that happened last weekend as when you're watching this video. If you end up enjoying the video though, feel free to drop it a like, subscribe to this channel if you're new around here as well, and let's get straight into it. So we kick things off with a very weird Friday. We had a very weird Friday in which CCTV went down, so the FIA weren't able to see the cars on the circuit. Not the fact that they have every single camera angle, the FOM broadcast anyway, from their T-cams to the helmet visor cams, to, basically everything that could be humanly possible. Having no CCTV cameras meant that they couldn't see the cars. Yeah, just another example of the F1 being just completely stupid. David Croft has literally been babbling it in our ears consistently, as I'm trying my hiccup midway through that. Consistently, he's been going on about, you can press the red button and you can go on board with all 20 drivers this year. So that technically means that the FIA will have that and even more camera angles anyway. You don't need to not have the CCTV to be able to see where a car is. So, yeah. Anyway, we'll let them have their issues. And of course, FP2 then was extended by half an hour. It was kind of also deducted by close to like 15-20 minutes because it rained at the end of the session. So it was a very sprint weekend-esque type of feature, really. Because of course, FP3 and then also qualifying were in the wet. Of course, qualifying was very interesting qualifying, actually. I really enjoyed it. Of course, Q1 was just bedding in the lap times and just improving. And I do like those qualifying sessions. I find them, I don't know about you, I find those qualifying sessions just really interesting. When, Max, for example, he pumps in a lap and it's like a 1:20, and then Alonso's fastest, and Hulkenberg's fastest, and Hamilton's fastest, and then Max comes back around for another lap, he's gone a second a bit quicker, and then Leclerc, and it's constantly changing, and it's just really, really fun. Q2, we saw the same thing again, but Albon just deciding, sod it, I'm going on the soft tyres, and I don't care what happens, because at the end of the day, he's in a Williams. Who cares? And it paid off for him massively. The guy gets into Q3, fastest of anybody. Job done, credit to him. And then, of course, we rock on with Q3 itself, which unfortunately was very much an anticlimactic moment. We saw a good qualifying with drivers again doing the same thing as they were in Q1. They were improving, but they had to push because the rain was coming and it was going to get heavier. Unfortunately, that crossover point was right when Piastri put it in the wall. So then by the time everyone went back out to do another run, it was completely irrelevant. No one could improve their times. And it was just a bit annoying because it was just like they all went out, did one lap, were nowhere near the pace and just came in, and it was just a bit like, oh, that sucks, doesn't it? But of course, in qualifying, we did see a couple of penalties coming each and everyone's way. Carlos Sainz really doesn't know how to get out of the way of cars, does he? Like, the man has literally constantly been impeding all weekend long. And obviously he got his penalty for his incident. Hulkenberg got a penalty for the red flag infringement for going too fast. A bit harsh because he was on a hot lap. So I know obviously at the end of the day, safety is safety. And if you're driving too fast, you're driving too fast. But he's crossed the line and it was almost like, right, Hulkenberg's just put a lap in. But when he's going at high speed, in wet conditions, I feel like it could have been a bit unfair. But at the end of the day, those type of penalties are 10-place grid penalties, and they gave him a 3-place grid penalty. So perhaps maybe he was still driving too fast, but they deemed that he could have slowed down quicker than where he was, but they accepted that it was wet, maybe, and that, it takes a bit more time for him to keep control of the car and not just slam on the brakes and lose control. Possibly, who knows? There was a lot of qualifying shocks, though. First things first was obviously Leclerc and also Perez, both of them getting knocked out in Q2. I think Stroll got knocked out in Q2 as well, I think, because I'm pretty sure he had a grid penalty as well, which knocked him back down to 16th place in the end. So those three getting knocked out in Q2 was a big surprise. Obviously in Q2, Leclerc straight away called for his engineers that it was time for the soft tyres, and obviously, he complained afterwards that they didn't swap. Leclerc puts too much blame here on Ferrari. Now, don't get me wrong. In this situation, Charles Leclerc was right. It was time for the dry tyres. He needed to put them on. The problem that I've got with what Leclerc is trying to say in his press conference of, we need to do this, we need to sort this out. Charles Leclerc said on the radio, it's time for dries, we need to come in, go on these dry tyres, whatever. But straight away after he says all that, he's like, but do you want me to put in the banker lap or not? And the team's like, yeah, we'd like you to. You're almost basically saying, this is what we need to do. But you want me to do what you want to do as well? In those situations, you've got to be, if you're going to be a world champion, if you're going to be a driver that gets it right, but also can get it wrong, you need to be authoritative. And you've got to say, if you're 100% committed, and you're saying, guys, straight away, it is definitely not into, I'm the one driving on this track, I can feel that it's time for dry tyres, I'm coming in. You come into the pits, and all of a sudden, you go onto those soft tyres, and you go in for it. And if you make a mistake, you say, that was my fault, I felt like it was time for the dries, and it wasn't. And at the end of the day, you've got to take those gambles. So for Leclerc, he wants to take that gamble. He feels like that gamble is on. But he keeps on constantly just going back to them and going, but do you want me to do a banker lap or not? Well, of course the team are going to want you to do a banker lap because you're going against what the team wants in the first place. So why would you say, oh, Ferrari need to, do X, Y, Z, when you've literally asked the question of do they want you to do something that they want you to do in the first place? Those are the type of positions where your Alonsos, your Hamiltons, your Verstappens, they wouldn't do that. They would be like, no, we're coming in. We need to make this pit stop. We need to get on the dry tyres. It is not time for these inters. We're coming in. Even Carlos Sainz would do that. It was like the Monaco Grand Prix. He was like, no, we're staying out. We're going on these, we're staying on these wet tyres. We're going straight to dries. In Silverstone last year, the team's like, you need to back up, give Leclerc space. And he's like, absolutely not. No, if I back up, I've got quick cars behind me. They're probably quicker than me on race pace. And I'm not listening to you. What did he do? He didn't listen to them. What happened? He won. What happened in Monaco? He didn't, he listened to their strategy. He built his own strategy with the team. And obviously, unfortunately, Latifi held him up so he couldn't win. But, it probably would have paid off. In that circumstance, it didn't because he came up behind Nicholas Latifi. It's just these things that Leclerc doesn't seem to be able to do yet. Just be even more authoritative. In those circumstances, you just have to keep saying, no, I am confident this is the way. Don't give Ferrari an option of doing a banker lap on a set of tyres that you know and you feel is just nowhere near good enough. Otherwise, you're just, stuffed, basically. So, yeah, it is what it is. But we need to have a conversation about a certain man, Sergio Perez. I'm looking at you, even though you probably don't even know who I am. You're not doing very good, are you? Well, he's doing better than what I would ever do if I jumped in a Formula 1 car, put it that way. But, yeah, weird from Sergio Perez right now. That's 4 out of the 8 races that he has failed to reach Q3 in one of the most dominant Formula 1 cars ever built. Questions need to start being asked. At the start of the season, we were looking at Sergio Perez and going, this guy might genuinely be on to get a championship out of this. He's the first race of the season. All right, Max beat him fair and square, but Leclerc sort of stopped him really from getting close because of following, etc. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Saudi Arabia, he took advantage from Max's problem in qualifying, but he got it on pole, and when Max was right on his tail, he held his own, carried on through. And then on Australia, of course, okay, things didn't go too well. He had the problem with the brakes, but he recovered to 5th. Then we go to Baku, and all of a sudden, he's back on form again, back in the win. And you're thinking, that's the type of area where you're just like, hang on a minute. He's had a knockback. He's suffered in qualifying. He'd only make it to 5th. Oh, is this going to be the moment when Verstappen pulls away? And then it's like, no. And then he comes back in and wins and holds off Verstappen and basically had him in his back pocket the whole weekend. And then you're thinking, right, here we go. And then obviously we got Miami, where Verstappen was far down the order, but Verstappen won the Grand Prix. And from that point onwards, it's just been the Max Verstappen. Well, I don't think anyone else has actually led a lap since then. That's depressing. Wow. Okay, yeah, I didn't think of that. But yeah, he just hasn't done anything since then. He's been awful. He's crashed in Monaco. He was legitimately off the pace in Spain and couldn't even get to Q3. He was on the wrong time. Couldn't get it right in qualifying in Canada. And I know what people are saying, right? for some people, you know, the Canadian Grand Prix, it's one of those, you could get knocked out, you maybe not. But the thing is he was never anywhere near on pace with Verstappen in Canada in those conditions anyway. Like in FP3, he was a good 1.9 seconds off the pace. And I'm sorry, for that Red Bull, you should be getting through into Q3. Like Hamilton, for example, he struggled a lot in those conditions in Q2 in Canada, but he set a lap on the intermediate tyres. Drivers around improved on the dry, slick tyres, and yet Hamilton's intermediate tyre lap was enough to get him into Q3. And yet Sergio Perez in a Red Bull couldn't even get it into tyre lap to work to get him into Q3. It just, something's wrong. And even in the race, actually, you know, the race in Canada, he was able to make his way up the field, kind of, but the safety car was literally the dream thing for Perez. He's cleared the midfield now. All he's got are the 2 Ferraris, then he can get onto the back of Hamilton, and then he can get onto the back of Alonso, and he couldn't even keep up with the Ferraris. And yet Verstappen is dominating the championship. He really is on a rough patch at the moment. And I do agree with Red Bull. You know, at the end of the day, Perez needs to just stop concerning himself with the World Championship because it's just living rent-free in his head. And he's completely lost all focus, all concentration. He needs a proper reset because if it's going to go the way it's going to go, Perez won't even get 3rd in the championship this season because Alonso and Hamilton, I'm going to be talking about Aston Martin and Mercedes a little bit further into this video, but they're not that far behind Sergio Perez in the championship. And with the rate of development that we're seeing, it won't be long before Mercedes and Aston Martin are faster than Red Bull. And I genuinely mean that, by the way. And that Perez is going to start losing out to them. Because if we're talking about, right, 3 equal cars, Aston Martin, Mercedes and Red Bull, those 3 equal cars, you will have Verstappen versus Alonso versus Hamilton versus George Russell. I am putting George Russell in the mix here because I do believe that, you know, he's pretty much mostly on par with Lewis Hamilton so far during his time at Mercedes. In all of those set of drivers, Perez wouldn't cope with Alonso and Hamilton in equal, you know, let's say between a tenth to 1 to 2 tenths of a second between them. Perez couldn't keep up with it. Stroll is useless. And Russell and Hamilton are probably the best evenly matched driver pairing. Ferrari are a bit off at the moment. And that just bodes badly for Perez because yes, they're 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship. Yes, Verstappen's going to win the championship. Yes, Red Bull are going to win the Constructors' Championship. But I cannot see Perez claiming 2nd in the championship. I just can't. And, you know, for the RB19 to not get a 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship would genuinely be embarrassing on Sergio Perez's behalf to not even do that. And it would raise questions whether he's worthy of a seat in the Red Bull. Because it's just the way Red Bull work. They're that type of team. You know, we've seen how much De Vries is getting battered for not putting in great performances. Yet the guy's never raced in Formula 1 before until this season. And he's in the slowest, probably at the moment, Constructors' Championship-wise, the slowest car. So yet, you're going to have that pressure on you. But he doesn't, well, for De Vries' sake, he doesn't deserve it. For Perez, you need to step up. Like, that's the point. But let's talk about the Grand Prix, though. Obviously, we saw a good start from Hamilton and Mercedes, and he jumped Alonso heading into the first corner. And that was kind of the funnily enough, as a Mercedes fanboy, that was why the race just didn't work anymore. Because Alonso was quicker than Hamilton in the Grand Prix. Aston Martin had more pace. And he probably, and overall, in terms of the race analysis, he was only a tenth of a second a lap slower than Max Verstappen throughout the whole of the Grand Prix. Yet from lap 25 onwards, he was told to lift and coast because of a false alarm or something like that on his car. And yet, you just think, if Alonso actually managed to not get jumped by Hamilton off the line, he definitely would have been fighting Verstappen and been in his DRS range. And it would have been an amazing Grand Prix. It wasn't, unfortunately. Hamilton... It's painful when, as Mercedes, I'm literally there at the start of the Grand Prix and I'm like, please, Hamilton, pass Alonso. And I'm like, yes, he's passed Alonso. Bang, let's get onto Verstappen's tail. And as the race is going on, I'm like, can Alonso just pass Hamilton? Because I need the entertaining Grand Prix. Oh, that was depressing. Obviously, we had the safety car, though. George Russell putting it in the wall. He wasn't really on par with Hamilton and Alonso. It was basically a race of Verstappen on his own, Hamilton and Alonso in a good close proximity with each other, Russell in his little bubble, then the 2 Ferraris, and then Perez. Obviously, Russell put it in the wall. How that car did not suffer suspension damage or was able to continue, I have no idea, because he really gave that a big whack into the wall there, and I'm surprised that didn't even cause the brake wear issues. It was actually the front left brake that failed or wore too excessively, which was on the other side of the car, so it didn't even make a difference to him anyway. That obviously brought out the safety car, so we saw the top three pit onto the hards. We saw the Ferraris doing a good strategy and staying out and building a gap then to the midfield, because there was a DRS train throughout the course of the Grand Prix, really. And Lando Norris basically just doing loads of overtakes and getting it right. And that was basically the sum of the Grand Prix. Unfortunately, it wasn't really another thriller, but talking about Ferrari, so let's shift to them, shall we? Shocking qualifying session, but an amazing Grand Prix from them, and a strategy that was the right one. I know, I'm just as shocked as everybody else that Ferrari got a strategy right, but they did. I genuinely... The weird thing is, though, is I just feel like they probably would have done something incorrect had they not had that. I mean, at the end of the day, they got it right. It could have gone wrong, but they got it right. They stayed out on their medium tyres. They kept life in them, and at the end of the day, they were able to build the gap to the guys behind them that were obviously way slower, and then, jump out onto their one-stop strategy. Of course, for the three cars in front, Verstappen, Hamilton, and Alonso, the Ferraris didn't have the pace for them, so it was pretty much just settle where you are, but you did the right work to get back up to where you were. So fair play to Ferrari. You can't really fault it. They did what they had to do, and they got pretty much the best that they could out of that race. As for Red Bull, Verstappen winning the Grand Prix, as per usual. Apparently he hit a bird at some point during the first stint, and unfortunately there is a picture, which you can search on social media, I will not be putting it up, of the bird in question stuck in Verstappen's car during the first stint, so that's not very lovely. But we've now been hearing these things, right, with Red Bull. Obviously, before I carry on with what I was going to say and dwindling off, Sergio Perez was rubbish this weekend, and he's got a lot of work to do to get back up to it. Now, I'm going to focus here on the Red Bull palaver that's been going on. Ted Kravitz mentioned that during his notebook, that Red Bull were already starting development on the RB20, which will be their next year's car. And basically, Ted went on and said that their wind tunnel penalty and all this stuff for their cost cap breach wasn't harsh enough, because they've already built a car that's dominant enough, and they're already looking now to go to next year's car. I completely disagree with Ted Kravitz on this one. And it's probably surprising, because like I've said too many times, as a Mercedes fan, surely I'd be thinking the same thing. Well, their penalty's not harsh enough. They're going to next year's car. They need more punishment because they screwed us out of the championship in 2021. The thing is, right, is Red Bull have got a big penalty for the wind tunnel time. But I think we've all realised, and we need to come to notice, that these past few races, this team that Red Bull have got, they're getting caught up. Like, there's no doubt about it. The average race pace in the Spanish Grand Prix was about 0.3 of a second between Hamilton and Verstappen. The average race pace in Canada was 0.1 of a second. The average race pace in Monaco, which was the race before, wasn't really that much between Verstappen and Alonso. Obviously, Verstappen had great tyre wear in that race, but again, it wasn't that much. From Monaco onwards, you can see there's plenty of F1 data analysis Twitter accounts out there that will showcase to you that Red Bull's advantage is getting slimmer. Whilst it's going to take time, and whilst, yes, Red Bull are going to win the championship, obviously Red Bull do have a slight advantage. They can work on next year's car, granted, yes. But in terms of the amount of development that they can do, they are really limited in terms of the wind tunnel time. So if they're going to do wind tunnel time to 2024, realistically, for Red Bull, they would probably want to be developing this car right up until maybe a race or two after the summer break, and then divert towards next year's car. And while Hamilton put out a post, put out in the media saying that we need to focus on 2024 because Red Bull need to, not necessarily, no, because these teams they need to find their concepts to keep building up to fight Red Bull. But the thing is they can afford to develop, because guess what? They've got more wind tunnel time. So they can go ahead into 2024, use the same amount of wind tunnel time as what Red Bull have for their 2024 project, but then spend even more of the wind tunnel time that they've still got to focus on their 2023 challenger, make sure that that's getting neatened up so that all they've got to do for 24 is then polish out what they've done in 23. And we've seen that. Aston Martin have got a big package that they arrived in Canada, and it's working. Mercedes-Benz have had a big package in Monaco. It's working. They've got a big package coming in Silverstone, and it's apparently meant to be larger than the one in Monaco. Aston Martin have got more pieces coming in Silverstone. Mercedes have another upgrade coming before the summer break, so probably like the Hungarian Grand Prix. Both teams will probably then have another upgrade coming after the summer break. If you look at Red Bull and what they've done throughout the season, granted, of course, that they have the fastest car, so what would they need to do? But they always have to develop because the gap is always going to close. And for Red Bull this season, they obviously they haven't had to do massive upgrades because their concept's the fastest, but they've done a little bit of work on the side pods. They obviously put a new floor in. They said they're probably going to have another floor at some point. But the real big advantage that Red Bull got is their straight line speed. And if these other teams finally extract the airflow efficiency to get that straight line speed that Red Bull are producing, then Red Bull are not that good in terms of anywhere else in the department because all the other teams out there are quicker than Red Bull in the corners. And Red Bull are faster in the straights. And that's the fact of it. You know, Red Bull right now, yes, they've got the dominant car. Yes, they're winning. Yes, they can transfer some of their funds towards 2024. But the fact of the matter is their penalty in terms of the average race pace. Like we were looking, 3-4 races ago, at least Red Bull being between half a second to a second a lap faster in race trim at the start of the season. We're now down to a tenth of a second. It's rapidly decreasing. And unfortunately, yes, Red Bull have the fastest car. Yes, they're going to win the championship. But they started off with the best concept. Obviously, it would be different if they had a different concept. Then they'd be in bigger trouble. They're not. But it is what it is. But I genuinely believe that Red Bull are getting caught up. Mercedes and Aston Martin in particular, they're the two teams that are already romping onto them. Ferrari are taking a bit of time. They'll probably get there. But for me, Mercedes and Aston Martin, I genuinely believe by the British Grand Prix will be matching pace with them. Whether I'm right or wrong is another matter. Looking further down the order though, quickly, because I'm rambling on for quite some time. Great race from Alex Albon. Great weekend. But one of the best weekends of his race career. He did what he had to do. He defended brilliantly by driving in a straight line, and no one could overtake him because he was quick in a straight line. But he made sure that he nailed his braking points into the corners. He nailed his exits so that they were good enough that everyone behind's DRS was so ineffective that it just wouldn't do anything. So hats off to Albon. Fantastic weekend for him. Williams upgrades working well. Quite a bit of a kick in the balls though for Logan Sargent that his upgrades don't arrive until Silverstone. You would have expected them to maybe do something to push it to Austria, but to get it only in Silverstone, it's a bit of an ouchy moment and a bit of a risk as well for Williams because if he crashed, it would have been bad news for him. Nick De Vries. Ouchie. Yeah, that was bad, wasn't it? Bad weekend for him. Bad weekend for AlphaTauri with Williams getting that point as well. Lando Norris, great weekend. Unfortunate that you got that penalty, but it was actually deserving. By the start of the hairpin, it was 3 seconds between him and Piastri, and then went up to like nearly 10 seconds by the time they got to the final corner. So he was kind of deserving of that penalty there in the end. So unsportsmanlike behaviour though was a weird way to put it. They could have literally just put driving too slow under the safety car or holding other drivers up that couldn't pass Piastri or even Norris in the pit lane. So that was a bit of a weird one to call it that. And yeah, Lance Stroll again, he needs to step up his game as well. I mean, he got the better of Alonso in Spain and you're thinking, good, right. And now Aston Martin are back on form, Alonso on the front row, and he's down in 16th place, and he's literally dropping that team down. When Aston Martin and Stroll will finally go, actually, my son's rubbish, and get rid of him, who knows? But that is pretty much it, really, for this weekend. Oh, final thing for Haas as well. Great qualifying for them again. Hulkenberg, bit of an underlying qualifying master here in Formula 1 in 2023. He's been doing the bits over Kevin Magnussen, but they've got a massive race pace issue. Very similar to Ferrari. Funny that, because they literally have the same cars. Kind of. Well, the same, basically. It is the same. I'm not even going to try and deny over it. Basically the same car. And Hulkenberg and Haas need to get a work on that. But heading into the Austrian Grand Prix, what do I think is going to happen? Well, Red Bull are going to probably win because, I mean, it's the Red Bull ring, and Red Bull has always been quick there. They do obviously have the quickest car at the moment. This first sector, I mean, there's a lot of long straights as well, which will help them. Aston Martin, I think, will be the second fastest car. I think in Canada, they didn't really get enough time to really understand their package. Kind of like Mercedes in Monaco in a way, because they only had that one dry FP2 session to trial different things, and then obviously it was the main race, so they had to basically limit what they did. And I still think then in Austria they'll be the second fastest, and I think Alonso could probably get a second place in that time. I think Mercedes will still be competitive in there, but probably not as competitive as Aston, especially sectors 2 and 3. That's some high-speed corners, which Mercedes do prefer. And Ferrari, it's a tyre wear tricky circuit, so Ferrari may struggle in there as well. In terms of further back, I think obviously Alpine are kind of solidifying themselves as the 5th fastest car. McLaren have got some big upgrades coming for Austria, so hopefully that can propel them, because they've got some big ones coming for Austria and for Silverstone, so we'll see if that makes any differences to them. And hopefully we just get a good race. But I want to end on one thing, right? In 2019, Mercedes-Benz won every single race of the season up to the Austrian Grand Prix, and then they were dethroned. Well, Red Bull have won every single race of this season. Can they be dethroned at Austria? I hope so, just for my own sanity and for entertainment purposes. But guys, that is it for the F1 debate for the Canadian Grand Prix. It is not over yet. I do think Red Bull are going to get caught up very, very soon. If you enjoyed the video though, drop it a like, subscribe if you're new around here as well. And I'll see you guys for the next one after the Austrian Grand Prix. Take care all. Peace.